Today on Tactical Tuesday, John and I are going to be analyzing and breaking down 4 common pre-flop mistakes that beginners make and what you can do to avoid them for the rest of your life, ideally. John, welcome to the show. You ready to break down these mistakes that you see people make, and especially low-stakes live cash games?
Yeah, definitely. The first mistake and the most common mistake that I see all over the place in low-stakes live games and also low-stakes online games is players playing way too passively. And I think this is a mistake that's really, it's a pitfall that's really easy for beginner players to fall into, because seeing flops and playing hands is, the fun part of playing poker, and it's why people play the game. But that often manifests in poor pre-flop play that usually leans too passive. It's pretty rare to find someone who is kind of maniacally aggressive. So a lot of what I'm talking about is just open limping, cold calling opens instead of 3-betting or folding, or even cold calling 3-bets instead of 4-betting or folding. And yeah, I think like those are the 3 most common passive kind of passivity related mistakes that I see most frequently.
And I think it's driven by risk aversion, right? It's driven by this sense that, like, I want to see if I make something before I place a big wager. I want to wait and see, like, oh, do I flop top pair, top kicker before I can, like, put a lot of money into the pot, or, so, and that's a very human thing. But when you're playing poker and you're trying to play poker very well, you just have to take risks. This is inherently a game of risk. And so playing aggressively is just the first fundamental part of a strong pre-flop strategy, and just something that I think human beings in general tend to overlook, tend to underdo. They tend to be way too passively from the jump, and so get off on the right foot by taking more aggressive actions and recognizing that, hey, this is just the path to playing strong, winning poker. I can't just wait to see if I make a pair or make 3 of a kind or make a flush or make a straight before I put money into the pot. I've got to start playing aggressively, keeping my opponents on their toes right from the jump. And the second most common pre-flop pitfall that John and I see from beginners is that they're inconsistent with their sizes. So they raise a different size based on various situations, or they 3-bet to a different size based on various situations. Generally speaking, they're raising to different sizes based on the strength of their hand. Typically, when a beginner player has a really good hand, they will open to 4 to 5 big blinds. And when they have a not so good hand, maybe they only open to 2 big blinds or 3 big blinds.
Or they limp, right? And this kind of goes into the passive issue, is just that, hey, if you're using 3 different sizes pre-flop and including having a limping range, well, one of the things that does is it makes it really easy for your opponents to kind of figure out where you are in your range, right? If you limp all your worst hands and you open small, or you raise small with your medium strength hands and you raise really big with your with your premium hands, well then, already from the jump, you're starting out the hand on the back foot, because your opponents probably have a pretty good idea of what types of hands you have in each of those ranges when you take those 3 actions, or take 3 different actions pre-flop.
You don't want your opponent to know what you have, right? Like, you want it to be as difficult as possible for them to recognize when you have a good hand, when you have a bad hand, when you have a medium hand. And so, like, whenever you're investing different amounts of money pre-flop based on the strength of your hand, from the very first decision point, right, you're kind of letting your opponent know what kind of hand you have and how they should respond. And that is going to put you in some really bad and at a big disadvantage as you move deeper and play the flop turn and the river, because villains should not have a good idea of what you have based on the very first decision that you make. It should take at least to the river, and ideally they should never have a great idea of what you have.
And preflop sizing is a really easy thing to fix. I think it takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes of studying and just memorizing exactly what sizes you're supposed to use in which situations. And those sizes are actually all spelled out in the Preflop Bootcamp course that's offered on the CPG website. And that's the first resource that I would look to kind of shore up any preflop sizing mistakes that I have. And also just everything as it relates to like preflop ranges, right? Like making sure that you're not playing too passively and figuring out, hey, these are the hands that I'm supposed to 3-bet in this situation, or these are the hands that I'm supposed to fold instead of cold calling facing an open.
I'm going to go one step further, John. Since we promised them we're going to solve their problems here for sizes, we can go through. We can give away the sizes that are included in Live Cash Preflop Bootcamp. So, the first one is raising first in the pot, right? So you're raising first in the pot. In low stakes live poker, you should start at 3 big blinds. And actually, so before we move forward here, these are recommendations of sizes, and they can be altered, right? You can have a strategy where you raise first in for 3 big blinds or 4 big blinds or 5 big blinds even, but you should always raise first in with that size, right? You should have a strategy and have a very uniform size that you use every single time and not use a bunch of different sizes. So first recommendation for raising first in is 3 big blinds. If you're going to ISO a limper, so ISOing is somebody limps and then you raise, and your goal is to force everybody else to fold so that, only the limper continues. Generally, your sizing for isolating a limper is going to be 3 big blinds plus 1 big blind for each limper. So if 2 people limp, then 3 big blinds plus the 2 limpers, you raise to 5 big blinds, right? The next is going to be re-raising, 3-betting, and this depends on whether you're in position or out of position as it relates to the size. If you're in position, you want to go 3x their raise first in size. So if they open to 3, you raise to 9. If they open to 4, you raise to 12. And then if you're out of position, you just want to go 4x the raise first in size. So if the button opens to 3 big blinds and you're in the small blind, you want to re-raise to 12 big blinds. So 4x the original open. And if you're 4-betting, whether in or out of position, and you're 100 big blinds deep, just make it 25 big blinds. So, if you're playing 2-5 and you're 4-betting, just always make it $125. Whether you're in or out of position, always make it the same size. And if you're 5-betting, assuming you're playing 100 big blinds deep, just put all the money in. Put all 100 big blinds in. Don't 5-bet to like 50 big blinds. Don't 4-bet to 50 big blinds. If you just stay consistent with all of these raise sizes, you'll be in much better shape than most human beings who play. And one thing that happens when you're disciplined and use the right raise sizes again and again and again is you start noticing when other people are not using the same raise sizes. And then you can start engaging your curiosity and trying to figure out, well, I wonder what that means. If splitting size is bad and I'm using one uniform size everywhere, what's it mean when, Doug down there in seat 2 is raising to 2 big blinds, but then sometimes they raise to 5 big blinds. Like that is meaningful information that will impact your response. So kind of leveraging the mistake that they're making to your advantage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that pre-flop sizing guide a lot. Those are pretty much the exact same sizes that I use when I play, even like high stakes online. Those are all those 3-bet and 4-bet and 5-bet sizes and multipliers are exactly the same sizes that I use when I play poker. So like this is not a strategy that's like specific or something that you have to give up once you get out of playing low stakes. This is just kind of sizing theory, pre-flop sizing theory forever and ever and over, regardless of how big you're playing or what stakes you're playing.
And it's too easy to get wrong. Like it's too easy to get wrong. You can do it, viewer who's watching this video. I know you can follow this script when you're playing, recall it and apply it with 100% precision. I believe in you.
Something that's much more difficult to do, in my opinion, is going to be the third catastrophic mistake that I see most frequently, and that's not injecting emotion into your pre-flop decision making. Especially at live poker, this is something that I see all the time. One of the most common examples being, hey, like I'm going to start playing some bad hands now, hands that I know that I shouldn't play because I've noticed that a lot of people are winning with their bad hands. Or I'm going to start playing bad hands now because my good hands I've been losing. My aces have gotten cracked 3 times, and so now I'm going to try playing some of the hands that crack my aces, and now I'm in there with 8-3 suited trying to win a pot. That is got to be one of the biggest downfalls of recreational, especially live recreational poker players, where they are just torching money with hands that shouldn't even be in the pot. I think the analogy that I think about most frequently when I'm kind of coaching this out of some of the players that I do private coaching with is, hey, if you were playing basketball and you saw someone shoot a half court shot with 20 seconds left on the shot clock and they drained it, would you now suddenly change your strategy to start taking half court shots with 20 seconds left on the shot clock? Absolutely not, right? Because that would that's very, very clear and obvious as a kind of a minus EV strategy or not a great way of playing basketball. And that's kind of the equivalent of what's happening in poker, right? You notice someone winning a hand with 7 deuce offsuit, and you're like, well, maybe that's what I should do. I should start playing these ridiculous hands that have very, very little hope of winning. And if you kind of zoomed out and looked at how those hands performed in the long run, it would be very clear that those hands are just straight up losing. So having preflop discipline and not being, not adding any or as little emotion as you possibly can to your preflop strategy, I think is really, really important. That's not to say that you shouldn't find reasons or places to deviate. For example, if you're playing versus an absolute whale who, is just raising every single hand and making huge mistakes post flop, well then yeah, maybe you can get in there with a couple extra hands that are gonna, that are break even versus a good player, but are gonna turn a profit versus this very, very weak player who's just, giving it away. And that's the fine balance that's really tough to strike with any poker strategy, not even preflop strategy. Is just, hey, like, look, I know most of the time I should do this. This should be my standard strategy, but when should I adjust for opponent specific tendencies? And I think that's gonna kind of go into the fourth mistake that we notice.
Yeah, that ties directly into mistake number 4, and that's that people are beginners make the mistake of not being aware of the situation that they're in. They just have very low situational awareness, right? I think it stems from not taking things into consideration, like what position you're in when you open. What position is your opponent in when they open? What is the relative strength of my hand, not the absolute strength of my hand, right? So, you can have a hand like King Queen offsuit, right? That by all rights is a pretty good hand. But if somebody opens from under the gun and then somebody 3-bets from middle position, and then it's your action on the button, King Queen off goes from a hand that you would play if everybody folded to just an outright fold, right? And even a hand like Ace Queen off would turn into, a fold based on this scenario. So, by situationally unaware, I just mean not tracking like how many players are left to act. So not making a decision of like, oh, this is a good hand, Jack 10 offsuit. It's 2 Broadway cards that are connected. I should just raise it from, under the gun. Well, no, because like there's a bunch of players left to act, and every single one of them can have aces in their range, and every single one of them can have really good hands. And so like the situation is going to dictate a lot of times what hand you should be playing and what hand you should not be playing. The action that's happened in front of you, who you're playing against, right? Like who's the villain in question here? If you have a hand like King Queen suited, that again is generally going to be a defend facing a 3-bet after you open, but then Mr. Old Man from Omaha that hasn't played a hand in the last 6 hours, that has dust growing on his stack, re-raises you. Maybe King Queen suited is not a good hand in this exact situation versus this exact opponent, right? So, paying attention to whether or not you're going to be in position or out of position after the flop, right? That's a huge consideration as to whether or not you should be playing the hand or whether or not, you should be folding. How much money are you investing pre-flop, right? Like, we've all seen the dude that, for some reason, invests 30% of their stack pre-flop. They call it 30 big blinds, and then the flop's like King, Queen, 9, and they check, and the guy bets, and they fold. Well, what on God's earth on that board could you have called a third of your stack and then not put the rest of your money in on a board that should connect with any reasonable range that you would put in 30 big blinds with, right? So like recognizing the price that you're getting to play each hand, recognizing your investment, just thinking on your feet, not calling 20 big blinds with a hand like Ace Jack suited that maybe could in some situations, but your opponent only has 40 big blinds in front of them, right? Not recognizing they're a short stack and you just put in like half of their stack with, a marginal hand, and there's no way that you can turn a profit. So really always paying attention to the exact scenario that you're in, taking all the data points, all the information into consideration before you make your decision. Beginner players just have generally very low situational awareness. And the way, in my opinion, to fix that, you need to pay attention, you need to focus, you need to realize that in every single hand there's information that's going on, and try to track it. Try to do the best that you can to track the information, and then pay attention to how your opponents have been previously responding. And then most importantly, I think, is to have a preflop strategy yourself, right? I think that this is maybe the biggest resolution to all of the problems that we've talked about is that you don't have a strategy that you feel confident and comfortable in that is going to make money, and so you just kind of wing it. You make emotional decisions. You don't pay attention to the data points because you don't really know what the data points mean, right? If if a reg 3-bets me versus a fish 3-betting me, that's something different, right? You're going to have a different strategy when different player profiles put more money in the pot. A short stack versus, playing 200 big blinds deep. You need to have strategies and understanding as to how these variables affect your holistic strategy. And my first recommendation is Live Cash Preflop Bootcamp. It's a CPG course I put together that is the strategy I use whenever I play live poker at any stake. I think it has different strategies for playing against fish, playing against regs, using data. So it's data driven as well as theoretical. And I think it just puts you in a position to be able to play above the rim again and again and again, take the right things into consideration, and kind of remove the emotion from your pre-flop decision making.
If you're a beginner poker player and you're going to work on one part of your strategy, pre-flop is by far and away the most impactful strategy or the most impactful node that you can study because of the trickle down effect that having a good pre-flop strategy has on everything that you do post-flop. If you're not getting to the flop with the right hands, with the right combos or the right number of combos or the right types of hands, well, that's going to make it really, really hard to play flop, turn, and river. So you just want to make sure that you're starting off on the right foot and getting to all these more complicated post-flop nodes with the right hands.
If you want to be able to hand read and know what people have in various situations, right? You have to have a pre-flop strategy. Else, you're just kind of guessing. You're just winging it. You're like, I don't know what hands open from under the gun in 3-bet. Like, I have a nebulous idea. And then, like, somewhere down the road, you're like, well, maybe they could have, like, 6-5 suited and the board's, like 3-4-7. And you don't realize, like, oh, they actually can never have 6-5 suited because that hand's not in the range that 3-bets versus this position. So, hand reading and figuring out, like, how strong your hand is, what hands your opponents have, what they're representing, just playing well post-flop is all driven by having a solid fundamental understanding of how pre-flop works.
If I could quickly summarize, the 4 points, the 4 mistakes that we see most frequently. Number 1 was just playing too passively, doing a lot of limping, doing a lot of cold calling 3-bets, all those types of mistakes.
Always think about raising before being passive.
Number 2, inconsistent raise sizes. Limping also falls into this category. Basically having a non-raise size when you enter a pot is going to be a huge mistake.
Put up a chart right now on the screen showing you what raise sizes you should make in all the various situations.
The third mistake that we see very frequently is emotional pre-flop decision making, playing bad hands or hands that shouldn't be played because you've seen them win frequently, or defending too many hands out of the big blind because you want to see a flop and you don't like folding. Solution:
nut up and stop being a little have discipline, recognize you're playing a long game, zoom out.
Last but not least, situational unawareness, not knowing whether you're going to be in position or out of position for the rest of the hand, not thinking about the specific opponent that you're playing against. The classic example being the guy who hasn't played a hand in, 7 orbits and finally 3-bets you, should probably start impacting your response to that 3-bet, and you probably shouldn't treat that person the same way you treat a reg or the maniac fish that's been 3-betting every other hand during the session. Situational awareness, I think the solution is probably going to be a little bit more difficult. I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Practice, pay attention, get reps. Think about whenever you make a mistake, think about what you could have done differently, what information you could have considered before making that decision that may have driven you another path, right? So lots of inquiry after playing pots, recognizing that in every single hand, there's a lot of information going on around you, and you can almost always do a better job of focusing and perceiving that information and then using it to your advantage. I think that it takes reps, it takes playing hands, it takes practice, and it takes deep thinking about it.
Yeah. And last but not least, just one last plug for Preflop Bootcamp. I was in the first iteration of the first Preflop Bootcamp that ever ran. I was in the first graduating class. when I was taking Preflop Bootcamp, when I was one of the enrollees, I was playing 100 NL, and a few months after graduating from Preflop Bootcamp, I was playing 1K NL online, and really that course has been like the basis for all my poker improvement and all my poker growth. None of that would have happened without having the solid Preflop strategy that I learned in Preflop Bootcamp. So cannot recommend Preflop Bootcamp and Live Cash Preflop Bootcamp enough to anyone trying to get started and starting to take poker seriously.
Yeah. Another solution to all the problems is, just cheat. Get a plan. Get a system that helps you play much better pre-flop, and invest energy into learning the system, into getting better systematically day after day after day. And yeah, you'll be up and running in no time and won't need to ever come back.
That doesn't sound like cheating. That sounds like hard work.
Yeah, well, cheating, hard work. Maybe the two of those are more related than you think, right? Just trying, but getting a system that would take you thousands of hours to put together yourself, if you were ever able to do it. I've played live poker for thousands and thousands of hours. In the making of Live Cash Preflop Bootcamp, my own game was elevated substantially by analyzing the data and seeing like, oh my God, I can't believe villains are playing this exploitatively at this many notes. I can't believe my opponents are making this many preflop mistakes. It just elevated my game in a way that nothing else ever has. And so I know that if it did that for me, then it will do that for you as well. And if you're looking to go deeper into preflop, John and I are going to be coming out with more preflop series that will, give you basic understanding and ideas of putting together a strategy, what it looks like, and then how to deploy it in your own games. And that's all we have for this week's episode of Tactical Tuesday.
Yeah, so look forward to those preflop videos, and we'll see you in the next episode.
See you in the next episode.
This is Tactical Tuesday on Chasing Poker Greatness with your hosts, Brad Wilson and John Chai. Coach Brad approved.